God has done so many powerful things since Urban Youth Impact was founded in 1997, and I'm going to share with you a story that will just give you a glimpse in some of the work that the Lord is doing. I began volunteering here in 2007, and shortly after, a terrible crime was committed in Dunbar Village. It involved many minor boys and then a mother and her son, and it was national news. It was just a horrific crime. So Urban Youth Impact immediately stepped in, and they gathered the churches in the area and said, we need to start a mentoring program to get involved with the kids who are living in Dunbar so something as horrific as this never happens again. So we began working with a lot of the kids that Urban Youth Impact already had relationships with in the area, and we began just a mentoring program where we took them on different field trips. They got to experience different things that, kids growing up the hood usually don't get to experience. But we also developed a lot of deep relationships with these kids because we were spending so much time with them. And there's this one kid named Johnny Davis, and he was really personable, really friendly when he wanted to be, but he was also a really difficult kid. He was by far the most challenging kid we had in our program, and he was so difficult that after maybe 2 or 3 times of coming to our program, we had to tell him he couldn't come back anymore. And one day I was in Dunbar Village visiting a couple of the other kids that I mentored, and while I was waiting by my car for them to come out, all of a sudden I noticed out of the corner of my eye Johnny Davis is walking towards me, and I'm like, oh great. So Johnny walks up to me and he says, hey Mr. Ryan, how you doing? And all of a sudden when he was talking, I heard the Lord speak to me, and all the Lord said was, you're going to mentor this kid. And I remember my immediate reaction was, I can't stand this kid, any kid but him. But I didn't hear anything back from the Lord at that point. So at that point I said, all right, Johnny, I'm going to a baseball game this weekend. Would you like to go with me? And he's like, yeah, I'd love to. So we go that weekend to the Florida Marlins, back when they were playing in the old Miami Dolphins Stadium. And before the game, we went to a Subway just to get some food. And I said, Johnny, please pray for the food, and then we'll eat and then we'll go to the game. And Johnny looks back me in the eye, he says, you know what, I'm not praying because I don't believe in God. And I said, okay, well, Johnny, just humor me. Just say a prayer, we'll eat and go to the game. So he bows his head and he says, Lord, if you're real, you'll give me a baseball. Amen. So at that point, I'm like, oh, great. And I'm thinking, all right, God, how am I going to get you out of this situation and make this kid believe in you? So I buy tickets. I do everything I can to buy tickets for the outfield. I'm thinking, okay, maybe, a ball will be hit out here and I can sprint to it and get it and help this kid's prayer come true, which just shows how bad my faith was at the time. So what happens is that we're walking down to our seats, and Johnny is following me, and I'm walking down. There's no one else on our row at the time, and all of a sudden, someone selling beer is following us. And I remember thinking, this is weird because I didn't ask the guy for beer, and Johnny's like a 6th grader. So he follows us. We sit down. He puts his case of beer a seat away from Johnny. He puts his hand in the seat right next to Johnny. He pulls out a baseball. He hands it to him, and he walks away without saying a word to either of us. Johnny was jumping up and down, screaming at the sky, you're real, you're real. And at that point, it was a miracle that God did, which I was able to witness, and just a small story of what he was doing. Several months later, we took the kids to play paintball. And while they were playing paintball, Johnny was, as usual, fighting with some of the other kids, and I was really getting on his case because I was upset with how he's behaving. A day later, one of the guys who volunteered for the first time calls me, and he says, my wife and I were praying, and God told us that Johnny has been sexually abused. And I said, okay, I guess I'll talk with him. And so I went to him and I said, Johnny, you remember that gentleman? He said, yeah. He's like, well, God told him that you'd been sexually abused. And Johnny admitted everything that happened and admitted that it was true, and even told me the horrific story of how it happened. And suddenly at that moment, I realized why he was in so much pain and why he was a kid that had so much inside of him that was so angry. And what Urban Youth Impact did at that time is they had a ministry where they helped get counseling for kids in the inner city who were victims of sexual abuse. And for 2 years, Johnny had a counselor where he was able to talk through all the problems and all the things that, not just the sexual abuse, but just his life in general, because he had so many difficulties and he had so much harm and so much pain. For years, Johnny was loved through Urban Youth Impact, whether it was a Kids Across America, which he attended, or if it was one of the many mentoring trips. Urban Youth Impact was always there to pour into Johnny's life. Tragically, in 2015, 3 months after he graduated high school, Johnny was killed in a drive-by shooting. We were all devastated. The mentors who spent so much time with him, all of his friends in the program, it was just a brutal, brutal time. And then we learned later he had gotten a girl pregnant and his son was going to be born in 4 months. We spend a significant amount of time with Johnny because we want to give him a father figure, a family, and the kind of things that he just wouldn't get in ordinary life as a kid growing up. Urban Youth Impact has really stepped up because Johnny has a private school education during the day, and then he's also involved with the after-school program after school. So he spends a ton of time at Urban Youth Impact, and all the people who work there just pour into this young man and love this young man. He loves going there. So Urban Youth has made just a huge difference in his life. The same mentoring program we did for Johnny Sr., we're now doing for Johnny Jr. Johnny and a bunch of his friends from around the area, we take and do the same kind of field trips and develop bonds and teach them about God, so he's going to have that same kind of experience in his life. Life is still tough for Johnny Jr. He talked to me once about how sad he is that he doesn't have a dad, but thanks to the support system at Urban Youth Impact, there is hope for Johnny. God is working through Urban Youth Impact to change the lives of kids like Johnny and many others. There are countless God stories like these you don't hear about. That is why we're thanking you so much for supporting Urban Youth Impact. You're making a bigger difference in the kids' lives than you could ever imagine. Thank you for helping us love, equip, and empower inner city youth to reach their God-given purpose.